You can go. You can proceed now.
Good
No, I'm
morning.
in something.
We thought we had started anyway. However, quite a few people joined our discussion, so we will start over. Um, Wanted to know if there are any questions or comments or anything that you guys would like to address today. And Vermel, you had a question regarding what the first chapter, the first verse of John. Is that it?
No, I have the wrong scripture,
Okay.
and I can't recall what scripture it is. So if you just, we'll just go continue on until
Well,
I'll call back.
no, okay. If it comes back to you, just let me know, okay?
I will. I will, most certainly.
Anyone else?
Yes, this is Angela. I have a question.
Hey, Angela.
Hey, hi everybody. The question I wanted to, I know that that we are the same as Jesus. There's no difference between who Jesus was and who we are. But what was the I mean, I ain't gonna say the difference. Okay, we are in the physical conception. It took a woman and a man, seed, and then so on. But Jesus' birth was different, but it still don't make him different. And I think that's one of the things when we say that what we've been discussing on the line that we are the same as Jesus. I think that's where a lot of people look at it because of Jesus' birth was different from the way that we were conceived, and they look at it as that that's the distinction that Jesus is more, I ain't gonna say more better, but I can't think of the word
I know.
You know what I'm trying to say?
There has been a question throughout the ages, and I have not seen a sufficient answer to that question. However, I will say this. I'm not sure that an immaculate conception means the same thing as we think it means. And even if it does, it still does not change the fact that he was conceived and he came from the womb of a woman. The conception in the womb of a woman. And the reason I don't see a difference in it also is because when we are conceived in the womb of a woman, it takes the same thing to give us life as it did Jesus. Upon exiting that womb, if you don't inhale the energy of life, namely breath, you don't live. So inhaling the energy of life, which is breath, is no different than inhaling the spirit itself. Without that, there is no life. The birth and the inhaling of the breath is the end of the continuum from the beginning until the present time of that child's birth. As far as us being like him, then if you really think about it, there were no humans in the earth who did not come from the womb of a woman. And if we look at it from the anthropology, through the eyes of an anthropologist, and if we look at it from beginning of humanity, what we see is every human came from the womb of Africa, an African woman. And if it came from an African woman, that means that the first man also came from an African woman. The question becomes, how was that child conceived in that woman's womb? That also had to be an immaculate conception in the same manner as Jesus, regardless of how you view it. Therefore, we would be the same as he from the beginning, and he is simply a reminder to us as to who we are. I certainly hope that helps you. And if there are questions from you or anyone else, or more importantly, if there is someone who sees it clearer, please speak now, please. Say so. Does that help you, Angela?
Yes.
Are there any questions about that from anyone else, or are there any statements or observations?
Yeah, good morning, Pastor Richard. Good morning, everyone. This is George in Philly. I think that, when Angela mentioned what she did, it made me just think about, when Jesus said, these things that I've done that you shall even do greater. And it just makes me come to a point of realizing that Jesus was saying that when you see me, you just see a reflection of yourself. So I think that, having, the knowledge of not just who we are, but just being in that mindset that he says that we can do these things, even greater things. So I think that, there's that relationship that we have the same energy, the same power to do as Jesus did. Those are just my thoughts.
Thank you, sir. And that does bring us to the second part of Angela's question. I appreciate that. That, Angela, I think you implied or you said that because of the type of birth or type of conception, there are people who felt that we were not as Jesus is. And George did indeed address that. And I want us to understand, again, that if Jesus did have an immaculate conception, so did we, so did all humans. Therefore, all have the same opportunity to be as Jesus is, not as he was. And in addition to what George reminds us of, I would like to say that our greatest problem is we do not embrace who Jesus said we are, neither do we embrace who we say we are. We say it, but are we who we say we are? Why do I say that? Because our actions do not match our conversation. Our conversation can talk about the essence of our being, yet our actions speak to individuality, it speaks to weakness, it speaks to a sense of being powerless. And that is a major difference when it comes to embracing who we are. Our talk and our walk must reflect each other. Does that make sense to you? I guess it does. Yeah. Any other questions or comments?
This is Vermel. I have a question. In chapter 1 of John, the first two verses, are they a repeat? Is 2 a repeat of what's said in 1?
In actuality, in those two verses, you could encapsulate most of the first chapter of Genesis, because it speaks to the beginning. The Aramaic word for beginning in that particular verse is no different than the Aramaic or the Hebrew word for beginning in the first chapter of Genesis. Okay?
Okay, so verse 2 is the same was in the beginning with God. It's not speaking of two different beginnings.
No, it's not.
Okay. And then on verse 8, where it says, he was not that light, but was sent to bear witness of that light, is that where we are talking about, is that in reference to the light being Jesus?
This is John. John was not the enlightenment, but he was a witness to the coming of the light. No different than saying that John was a witness to the light that was being sent into the earth. The scripture talks about, I believe it's in Malachi, where the heavens were shut up for generations, for 700 years, I believe it was. In other words, there was no word from the Lord, meaning that the priests were running amok. They were doing what they wanted to do, and they were teaching what they chose to teach. And now darkness pervaded or covered the earth. And when the darkness covered the earth, it's no different than the darkness in Genesis 1. The darkness was a different type of darkness, but it was still darkness. And when that darkness covered the earth, what happened? John became a witness to the one who was sent to bring enlightenment to the earth. In other words, to open the eye of those who were seeking light itself, or the seekers of truth and righteousness. And just as that happened then, so are we now. We are in the midst of a darkness that covers the earth. And that darkness that covers the earth has pushed men to the brink of crying out for something better. And in doing so, there have been raised up a group of people who are willing to do whatever is necessary in order to be conduits for that light. And the light of which I speak is the light that Jesus came to bring. Jesus actually came into the earth to be a reminder of what we are supposed to look like spiritually when we are reflective of the image in which we were created. And from the time of Jesus' ascension until now, the light has grown dim and dimmer and dimmer until now. So it is at this point that there is a type of human who is willing to stand in the gap. There is a type of Adam who is willing to be a bridge between enlightenment and this earth realm. And in doing so, that shroud of darkness, that veil of darkness is being removed from the eye so others can see that there is hope and there is light to be had. Now people are beginning to see that righteousness can and will prevail, even though they may not identify it as that. So we are at the same point where we were in terms of humanity, where we were when John became a witness to the entrance of Jesus into this, spiritual fray, or the spiritual discussions about what enlightenment is. Does that help you? And if anyone else would have anything to add to that or question about that, please raise it.
It does, but I still have, so when he's speaking of the true light, that is the same light that he says is in every man, but we as humans have dimmed that light within ourselves. We have dimmed who we really are.
We as animals have dimmed that light, yes. We are human. We are brought into this earth to be human. The question is, what is a human? A human is a reflection of its creator. And the human is Elohim in bodily form. And if we are not being reflective of Elohim in physical
creatures,
then what are we reflecting? Our mindset has been that of an animalistic nature. And the animalistic nature simply speaks to a nature whose focus is primarily survival and procreation, because procreation is indeed a part of survival. It has no bearing on doing anything that is going to be beneficial to the whole, meaning to everyone in the earth realm. And when we get to a place where we are primarily focused on survival, it is then not only does our light begin to dim, it becomes so dark until we are pushed in a corner. And the only way that the earth can survive is that there are there are types of men or in this earth who reject the animalistic attitude and seek above everything else to understand the nature of its creation. And it is that point that it becomes the human means, and that it becomes Elohim in physical form, and it begins to fill the atmosphere of this earth realm with such enlightenment until others began to experience it. And during the course of this experience, others began to see that there is more to life than the acquisition of material things. I hope that helps.
It does. Thank you.
Anyone else? Questions, comments?
We
Go ahead.
we spoke on this before and talked about the connection with the beginning of Genesis and looking at the word meaning miltha, and I wanted to read both of those two verses in from the Aramaic direct Aramaic translation, and then talk about it a little bit more. So, in the beginning, there was the miltha being once again the word, and he, the miltha, was with Allah, and Allah himself was the miltha. Verse 2, this one was existing in the beginning with Allah. So as Pastor Richard was just speaking, first of all, the word miltha has many, I don't want to say many, but it has a vast, not just the meaning, but what it represents is vast. And it cannot be put in just the English word. There is no English equivalent. And one of the things that miltha encompasses, as Pastor Richard was saying, is the physical manifestation of Elohim. And what Jesus represented is what the miltha, one of the things, what miltha is trying to capture, or what miltha is talking about. Notice I didn't just say who Jesus is, because we think of just Jesus, or as we normally think of Jesus, or at least traditionally, we think of a physical person who was capable of doing some miraculous things. But we're talking about beyond that in terms of not what Jesus can do or what Jesus did, but what Jesus is, which is totally different, and what Jesus actually represents. And so what it's actually doing is making the connection, saying that going back to the verses in John 1 and 2, in the beginning, if you want to think about it. And when I say Jesus, I'm also talking about every last one of us as well, in terms of this bringing, painting a picture, so to speak, or trying to convey unity. So in the beginning, there was Jesus, there was Elohim, there was you, which is at this particular time, like I said, the physical representation of Elohim. And he, us, you and I, were the words. Every time we're talking about word, we're not just talking about the book, we're not talking about the law, we're talking about our being and who we are. Was with Allah. It says, the New King James Version stuff says God, but this is Allah. And for anyone, what is saying when we talk about Allah, it is talking about all that exists, if that's the way you want to look at it. Beyond what we could ever imagine, not some man, not just some being that we can give attributes, etc. Allah, God, is all that exists. So with that said, I want to start over right quick. In the beginning, there was us, and we were the Word. We were Elohim, we were Jesus, and we were with all that exists, Allah. And Allah himself was us, the same. This one, speaking of us, existing in the beginning with Allah. I'm finished at the moment.
I have a question.
Yes.
How did we get away from knowing that we were gods? I mean, how did we move away from knowing that? How did our minds put ourselves in a position that we're not one with God, or we're not God? You understand what I'm saying?
I do. Thank you for that question. The way we got away from it is that it was through brutality. It was because of trusting the wrong people. It was because we sought to become the ones who enslaved us. We sought to become the ones who conquered the world. If you really look at history, what you see is even during the period that Jesus was in the earth, that Europeans sought to conquer the world, and they did. And in conquering the world, not understanding the culture and not even caring to understand the culture of the people who they conquered, they simply took what they felt was beneficial to them, and they manipulated it to be what they desired it to be. And in doing so, they forced those who were conquered to acquiesce to whatever they taught them. And if you refused to embrace what they taught, then you were brutally murdered or beaten or both. And seeing the brutality that was being meted out, the people who were parents during that period wanted to protect their children. Primarily, mothers protected their sons because they used the men as examples of how brutal they were. And they would tell their boys to be obedient to their master in order for them not to be brutalized and murdered. So what happened is, after generations of that type of abuse, it did not take much for those who, our ancestors who understood spirituality, to begin to push it further and further down inside of them, or should I say, to push it further and further away from the forefront of their memories. And by the time it got to us, we have been so ingrained with this type of attitude until it does not take the oppressor to personally be involved in the coercion that's necessary for us to forget who we are. We do it to ourselves now, and we do it in such subtle ways until we don't even recognize it. And I do not want you to think for a moment that it is only the African who has acquiesced to this type of treatment. The Japanese did it, and that was the main reason that Nagasaki and Hiroshima were destroyed, is to force them into submission in Japan. The Chinese have done it, and all of them are making every effort to be as the Caucasian is, and that is rich and greedy. Capitalism has actually conquered the world in terms of economics, and what we have done, we don't see it that way, but we have done everything in order to be accepted by the Caucasian, as opposed to doing everything to find out who we truly are. At this juncture of our lives, we are digging deeper into the scriptures as well as our history to understand who we are and how we got to where. What we have found is that the scriptures speak purely of reconciliation for all humanity. And that reconciliation comes when men began to understand and embrace who they are, primarily the African, began to embrace who they truly are. And in doing so, do not seek retribution for what has been done to them. Do not seek revenge in any way whatsoever. Yahweh said, vengeance is his. So, or it, I should say. So the greatest vengeance that I can ever think about to wreak on anyone is to love them, to bring them to a place so steeped in love until they cannot resist the journey that brings them to a place of righteousness, just as it has brought us to that place. And I hope that helps you, Charles. And if there are further questions or comments, please speak now.
It helped me.
Good, thank you. Anyone else?
I just want to ask, didn't it happen? Didn't our separating ourselves from the Creator happen longer ago than that?
When I look at spirituality before religion, when I look at the history of the Cushite kingdom, I see that the spiritual aspects of our culture were intact until there was an invasion from the north, actually from Southeast Asia, coming in from that, the invaders coming in from that part of the country, and during the period that Jesus walked the earth, that was simply a continuation of that time period, of those events rather. Audrey?
Pastor. Oh, I'm sorry. Go ahead.
Did that help you, Audrey?
Well, so what's the meaning of the scripture in Isaiah, or wherever it is, that says, I will bring you back to me, even if it takes bringing you in chains? So wasn't that a longer ago time?
It was not. As a matter of fact, the Cushite kingdom was long before the scriptures, the prophets, the accounts rather of the prophets was written. The accounts of the prophets were written after the inception of the city-state of Egypt. And prior to the city-state of Egypt was the Cushite kingdom. And the movement away from the Creator came in one, I can't remember which dynasty it was, but it came before Isaiah wrote.
Yeah, that's what I mean.
I beg your pardon?
That's what I mean. It happened a longer, excuse me. It happened a long time before slavery in the New World.
Right.
Okay.
And when we talk about a long time before slavery, keep in mind, I'm not just talking to you, Audrey, what we have to keep in mind is that this invasion also took place with Jesus in the earth, and that was not slavery. That was occupation. That was it was occupiers who controlled that part of the world. The whole advent of the New World slavery came, probably 1,800 years after Jesus, maybe, or somewhere in that range, before the New World slavery came into being.
Right.
Any other questions or comments?
Good morning, Pastor. This is Kathy. I have a question and possibly just a comment. I'm not sure. But going back to the question that Charles just asked, I was looking at the scripture, and I've been thinking about the scripture, and I think it's Proverbs maybe 20, 9, verse 18, where it talks about without a vision, the people perish. And another translation says, without a vision, people cast off all restraints. And thinking about vision, is vision speaking to the fact that when you have no spiritual insight of self and truth, you cast off all restraints, meaning you go in your own direction, seeking an identity in another way that takes you further and further away from your spiritual self. And as a result, we are now living in a place where we don't understand who we are. And is that not what we're seeing happening in the present times right now? People have cast off all restraints, trying to figure out ways and laws of how, and pass laws of how they can be who they decided they are, not according to what the scripture says they are, but who they think they are. Am I saying that the right way?
Yes, you are. And when it speaks of that, I think it speaks even for more than that, Kathy. I think also not only is it speaking of not having a vision of who we are, but it's seeking to impose a vision on people as to who we think we are. An example of that is this. Rather than looking for the divinity inwardly, we are taught to look for it outwardly. We are taught that we are supposed to seek a God that is external of us as opposed to the divine that's within us. And the whole concept of talking about a vision is talking about what is revealed to you. So if we don't have revelation, then we do perish, because without revelation, as you said, we make it up as we go along. My words, not yours, but we make it up as we go along, and we make it be what we want it to be. And the we who does that is the dominant people in the society. Whoever dominates society determines what the history and direction of that society is. That has been true up until this point. And we have begun to see that dominance in a society is different than dominating the earth. Dominance in a society comes at the will of men, and dominance in the earth comes at the will and the creation of Avum, of our Father, of the Creator. And that dominance in the earth is for the benefit of the whole of humanity. And it is at this juncture in our lives that we are getting back to the place where we are having visions, meaning that there are things that are being revealed to us. And as they are revealed to us, we discuss them, which means that we bring them into this realm by virtue of speaking them. We also need to understand that the reason it is so important that we speak concerning what is revealed to us is because our words are a combination of two worlds. That one world actually appearing to be two, and I will talk about that later. And that is the energy of the spirit and the verbal sound, the vocal sound. It is heaven and earth combining to bring truth into this realm. The breath is spiritual, and the verbal sound that vibrates on our vocal cords are the material aspects of this earth realm. So up until this point, that measure of our creation has been used to bring things into existence that was not beneficial to everyone in the earth. Now that we are beginning to see the power within, and we're beginning to see the divine nature of our being, we are now speaking the words of righteousness in order to dominate a society of unrighteousness. And as that begins to take shape, it does not look like anything that we've seen in the past, and that is one of the reasons there are times when we feel a sense of discouragement, because it appears that so much is going wrong. How can speaking the words of righteousness make it right again? that so much is going wrong until it seems as though there are no changes being made. Yet, we continue this journey. Why? Because there is a knowing deep in us that says to us, you are on the right path, even though your eyes are seeing something different than what you think it should be, and your emotions are experiencing something that's different than what you think it should be. The change comes not because of what you see with your eyes. The change comes because of what you experience deep in your soul. Does that make sense to you?
Yes, it does.
Are there any questions or comments about this? Or anything that we've said or have not said for that matter? Archer, when we were talking, I got the feeling that we needed to talk about that a little bit more. Do you have any other questions about that, please? Or you want to expand on the question you raised?
I have another question, but I mean, it's not dealing with what we're talking about now. I'm just hoping it may be.
Charles,
The question.
Go ahead,
Okay.
Charles. Go ahead, Charles.
I don't want to go in another direction right now. That's why I want Charles to wait a minute. Did you have a question in that regard, Audrey, or a statement to expand on that?
Not so much. I just feel like our diversion away from the Creator happened much longer ago than New World slavery and all its effects.
Definitely.
Yeah, that was my only point.
I agree with that wholeheartedly. And there's a lot of history to speak to that.
Right.
Thank you. Okay.
Well,
Charles?
okay. My question is, you remember when Babylon, well, I don't know about the Babylon, when they were building the tower, everybody wanted to be in heaven with God. And God came down and confused everyone. Now, in this age, people like NASA want to get into space, want to go to space. What made this time different from that time?
There is no difference. When it talks about building the Tower of Babel, and it speaks to the idea of confusing languages, and it speaks to the reason for the construction of a tower, this speaks more to the nature of man deciding what spirituality is for him. And the confusion of the language goes deeper than someone speaking Chinese and someone else speaking English or Spanish. The language differences are in our midst right now. As a matter of fact, we can speak the same language and still be speaking a different language. And if you can understand that, if we were right now standing in the midst of a church congregation speaking what we are talking about now in regards to the scriptures, we would be speaking a language that is not understood by those in religious circles. If we were to speak to governmental concerns about how it is necessary for us to utilize the words of Scripture in order to bring about a structured government for the benefit of humanity, we would be speaking a language different than what they understand. So the linguistic differences is not so much a cultural difference in how you speak as much as it is a spiritual difference in how you are seeing what righteousness and unrighteousness are. Okay? that help you, Charles?
Yes, it did.
Thank you, sir. Anyone else?
Hey, good morning, everyone. This may aid Miss Audrey in the question and our statements that she said. Before there was Christianity, there was a maneuverability out here called Kabbalah. I think it's spelled Alkebulan. And this was a maneuverability that kept man, religion, and politics in the chokehold at bay. Some anthropologists and some archaeologists, they state that the Garden of Eden is in the Kabbalah, and the Kabbalah is the original name of Africa. So there was number one, there was something out here before Christianity. And when you do your own research on the Kabbalah, they talk about the Egyptians' influence. They do not say the Egyptians ruled the world or conquered the world. They said the Egyptians had influence on the world. And that's one thing you need to know about the European culture. They conquered. Conquered means blood was shed. A lot of snatching and grabbing. Same thing with Moors. I haven't seen any documentation of Moors going in and snatching and grabbing. They worked their way in. They shared their knowledge. They shared their gifts. So if you don't know, just go back to that, look it up, a Kabbalah, and this was the maneuverability way before Christianity came into play, and it talks about the land of Kush, and a lot of, I'm not going to say a lot, a certain percentage of the females that came out of the land of Kush, they were fierce warriors. One in particular is I think it's Nefertari. So that may aid you, Reb, if it's anything I said that you may have to clean up for me, because I know Reb know it. But is that pretty much fair to say, or not fair to say?
Well, that is the name that was given to Africa before it became Africa in common knowledge. Also, when we talk about Egypt, we have to talk about Egyptian influence differently. What happened is, well, let me back up. Before there was Christianity, there was no imperialistic religion in the earth. And Christianity is a imperialistic religion, which means that it sought to conquer the earth as well as force other people to acquiesce to Christianity, which means that Christianity became an agent of the government for the purpose of controlling and manipulating the population. Having said that, when we talk about Egypt, we have to change our attitude towards Egypt. Egypt, in its original state, was not a country. It was a part of a kingdom. It was created to be a nation state, no different than New York is a state in the U.S. Egypt was a state in the Kushite kingdom. And the Kushites appointed rulers in every sector that they ruled, meaning that there was a superior king, and there were kings but ruled under the guidance of the primary king. And Egypt was ruled in that manner. and the primary king moved the kingdom to the area that's called Egypt after he built Egypt. If you look at that history, you will see that Egypt was constructed from nothing by the Cushites, and it became a part of that kingdom. It was not a nation. The Europeans made it a nation because they wrote and influenced history. And in doing so, it separated Egypt from its original organizers, or Egypt from its original state. And it gave priority to people in Egypt who were not the original people who established Egypt as a nation state or as a portion of the Kushite kingdom. So we have to begin to look at Egypt differently than it was looked upon during that era. And when we do that, we see then that there is not a distinction between Egypt and Africa and Palestine, that all of those are the same areas. And we begin to understand that with the commonality of the kingdom, there is also a commonality of the culture. It is out of this culture that we get the written language, that we get mathematics and everything else that we have in the sciences as well as in spirituality. As a matter of truth, if you look at the nature of that history, what you will see is that there is no difference between the scientists and the priests. They are one and the same. The scientists and the priests are the same because the priest was able to discern the spiritual aspects of life itself, and the scientist was able to bring under control the natural occurrences in a given area. For example, it was the Cushite king who looked at the Nile River and saw a hill in the midst of it that he wanted to dedicate to Ptah, the beginner, the one who is the creator of life. And Ptah is no different in Egyptian understanding than Elohim is in Hebraic understanding. And he redirected the Nile River in order for that to occur. And once he redirected the Nile, it is at that point that Egypt gained the prominence that it gained simply because it was a place where the primary king of the Kushite kingdom lived. And from that came the pharaohs, and here we are in history today. Any questions or comments about that? And George, I hope that kind of sums up or fill in the spaces that you left there.
Oh, okay, well, Reb, I got another question for you. In Genesis, it talks about, I think it's Genesis, the young lady that was an Egyptian woman called Hagar. Is she more so the mother of Isaac? Or what was her significance? Because when you say Egyptian, that is, to me, describing a nationality or someone of color. You understand the question or you don't?
Oh, I'm sorry, George. I thought you had raised your question. I'm sorry.
No. Is that a question you understand?
Yes, it is.
Someone help me out.
It is. When you look at the scriptures and you see Hagar, and it says that Hagar was an Egyptian, it is no different than saying Hagar was a Babylonian or Hagar came from this part of the world. It is not dealing with Egypt in the way that we deal with Egypt. And I don't want to get too much in the weeds on this historical nature of it, because in order to get deeper into it, we have to look at Ethiopia too, because it's also in the same area. But anyway, when we look at Hagar, what we see is a woman from New York who ended up in South Carolina. if you want to look at it that way. She is the mother of Ishmael, and she is also the mother of 5 other sons that Abraham had. In the Christian settings, in religious settings, you only hear about the 2 sons of Abraham, and that's Isaac and Ishmael. You don't hear about the 5 that came into being or came from the womb of Hagar. Her name was something different. What was her name? In the 25th chapter of Genesis, that's where you will find the story of Abraham having 5 sons by Hagar, the handmaiden. And if you read the history of that, you will see that after she left the presence of Sarah and Abraham, she returned home, and it says that she kept herself, meaning that she was not with another male. And when Sarah died, it is at that point that Abraham and she became a family unit, and from them came 5 sons. And Abraham gave them the spiritual understanding that he had received through revelation, and he sent them into the east, meaning that he sent them into different parts of the world with those gifts of understanding. And it is from those gifts of understanding that we get the various religions in the East that we have today. And if you look at the history of those religions as well as the holy books or the holy writings from those religions, what you will find is that they are synonymous with the understandings of the scriptures that we have today. The discrepancies, the major discrepancies in the scripture comes through translations and comes through efforts to make the scriptures fit cultural norms as opposed to being what they were written to be. And I hope that helps you, George, and the rest of you, of course. Questions, comments? No questions, no comments. This is not so much the direction I thought we were going in. However, I am open to any questions that you have, because I probably will address what I was thinking about on tomorrow. No questions, no comments.
I have a question.
Okay.
We talked about God's promises, and God is who He is, or it is. Why does God have to promise?
What do you mean?
Well, you know how we say, well, I promise I'll do this, I promise I'll do that. And my question is, why does it say that, like the promised land?
Oh, okay.
That.
Okay, I got you. When it talks about the promised land, it is talking about a consciousness, a new awareness of the relationship that men have with his Creator. And if we are to exercise free will, then we must come to these conclusions and understandings based upon our desire to do so. And what the Creator is saying, if you do X, Y, and Z, this is the consciousness that you will end up with. This is what you will become aware of. This is what you will see. However, if you do not do this, then you will remain in your place of ignorance about spirituality. It's pretty much simple as that, Evelyn.
Well, I'm talking about just the word promise.
Well, that's the promise. He said, if you do this, this is what I'm going to do. I promise you, if you follow what I'm teaching you, you will know who you are. That's that's the vein in which those promises were made. Why would he not promise it? Our expectation would be for God just to do it, right?
Yes.
Well, if he were to do it, then what would the free will be? If I were to give it to you, did you make a choice?
No.
So free will involves a choice, doesn't it?
Yes.
And in order for you to be divine, you have to have the will to do what you desire to do.
So is that like promise yes and amen, meaning it is done?
Not so much that as it is a promise. When he makes a promise, it doesn't mean it's done in regards to you. It's only done in regards to you when you follow the instructions that result in you receiving the promise. Does that make sense?
Yes.
And part of this, as it relates to the promise and why it cannot just be given to you as well, is because part of this is awareness of who you are, so to speak. And so everything takes place, and also part of the promise of when we think about it, like it is the case at this particular moment, is as if you, us, only need to add our whole selves to it in the same way that a cake exists once you add the certain ingredients to make that cake. So it's full of potential, and that thing is just ready to happen. It's just a matter of those ingredients, and that's even making it more difficult, but those ingredients coming together. So that is the way when we say it is so. When we talk about potential, we talk about the manifestation, etc. It's as if, in a sense, we have to get out of the way of ourselves. We have to put ourselves in a place to allow this happen. So the only reason we don't have the awareness this thing has not, this is funny speaking of it in terms of in time, but the only way something has not manifest at this particular moment, so to speak, is because we have not allowed it to do so. And as soon as we do so, which of course we are studying, learning, and becoming aware of, that thing is automatic. It is extremely natural, just like the sun rising, just like it raining, etc. I'm finished.
Okay. Anyone else?
Well, I also think that the promise of God or the promise of anyone is to keep you motivated or to keep me motivated. And when God promises you something, there is instructions that you have to follow to the T. No shortcuts with it. It's no different than the agreement or promise that I've made to Drake. You graduate college, I got your car, and I got your down payment for your house. That's a promise. However, he only gets it if he graduates college and gets gainfully, well, not even get gainfully employed, because I didn't say that. If you graduate college, I promise to get you a car and make your down payment. My promise is to keep him motivated. So I would look at God's promise, keep me motivated, and follow the instruction. So that's how I look at promise. Is that safe to say with you all or not safe to say with you?
What is God's promise? We talk about that. Evelyn, you raised that question, and I wonder if we ever really think about what is the promise and what are the instructions. And I'm not talking to you personally, Evelyn. That's not a question that you raised, raise those questions with me. What is this promise? And
Say, this is Vermel. My question is a promise the same as the covenant, or they're two different things, or components of each other?
covenants are in blood.
Okay.
Our promise doesn't have to be. Promise is based on integrity.
So, the Creator's has a covenant with us?
We are getting into two different areas now.
Okay, all right. I need to understand promise.
The promise comes as a result of a covenant.
Promise comes as a result of a covenant.
What
That's a new question.
you say, dear?
For me, that's a load of questions. Then I really need to understand what a covenant is and how a promise comes out of that covenant.
A covenant means that I will give my life for you. I will always be there for you regardless of what happens. We are one. A covenant speaks to the idea of being one with, and you're always there for provision, protection, etc. A promise comes after that. And I promise if you keep this covenant, these are the things that you would get as a result of keeping this covenant. How do I keep the covenant? I stay faithful to my Creator.
Okay.
Got it?
I got it. An example of that is the gentleman who shut up the rain in an area.
Yes.
Okay. Got it.
Now, I want to go back to the promise. What is the promise? Is the promise any different now than what it was then?
No.
What is the promise? Has the promise been revealed? Think about it.
Well, Rev, I can't do it now. Could someone look up the word promise and give me what Webster says, if you don't mind?
Goodbye. What happened?
We're still here.
Must be something.
Oh, okay.
Yeah.
We are with the promise right now. What was the promise? The promise deals with what man was in need of at that time and didn't know it. If the promise is for you to know who you are, right?
Mm-hmm.
Or if the promise is for you to enter a consciousness that's different than the consciousness that you're currently in, then that means that if you embrace that the covenant and the rudiments of the covenant, then you will, as a result, have an awareness of who you are. A promise is a declaration that something will or will not be done. Or it is an assurance on which expectation is to be based. So when we talk about that, we cannot look at what the promise is without looking at what Jesus taught. What did Jesus teach? Everything Jesus taught was in regards to the kingdom. And the kingdom, the teachings of Jesus in regards to the kingdom were the principles of how we are to live in this earth and be one with the one who brought us into this earth. How do we do that? Every bit of that begins with a desire. Our desire to understand who we are, as well as understand the spiritual nature or the spiritual essence of what Jesus taught. With that desire, we are saying to our Creator, guide us to that place of understanding. In regards to us, the guidance led us to a deeper understanding of the Old Testament first, because we studied Kabbalah and we studied Hebrew without having any understanding of the linguistic structure. We went to sources that translated and interpreted. So, as we did that, we were then guided to the Aramaic. How did we get to that? Some years ago, a statement was made, disregard everything in the black, read only what's in the red. And when we understand what's in the red, we'll understand the rest of it. Well, that statement and that acquiescence guided us to a place where we needed to see more than the Greek when it came to understanding what Jesus said, because the Greek made no sense, and it was not the same translations as was the Aramaic or the Hebrew. Because when we looked at words that were spoken by Jesus in the Greek and looked at them in the Hebrew, they were different. So our desire then became to understand what Jesus was saying from the language that Jesus spoke. That guided us to sources of Aramaic teachings. And by doing that, we were able to then understand what Jesus taught. What were we beginning to understand? We were beginning to understand the principles of the kingdom. And now we were enjoying or experiencing the promise and had not even realized it. And the promise that we were experiencing and are at this moment is the promise of knowing who we are and being one with the Father. If you believe as I believe, ask what you will and it shall be given. If you trust the Father as I trust the Father, not only will you do what I have done, but greater things than these ye shall do, promise. What is this saying? If you are asking, you don't ask for yourself because the Father already knows what you need. Your asking is on the behalf of humanity for an understanding of who you are. And then we can begin to understand each other, because as I am, so are you. When we understand what Jesus did, then we will understand what we are doing. If you trust the Father as I trust the Father, not only will you do what I have done, what did Jesus do? Jesus opened the scriptures. He rightly translated the orders from what we call the Ten Commandments. He actually brought to life the things that the priests were supposed to teach. And in doing so, Jesus' teachings, opened us up to seeing that we are indeed the image of Elohim. And what is that image? That image is not a physical form. That image consists of principles that guide the consciousness and the life of this earth realm, be it a tree or a person in this land. It tells us how to regulate our thinking. It tells us how to speak so that we can bring into being righteousness, meaning that a right relationship with each other as well as one with the Father. Why? Because if you don't have a righteous relationship with each other, you will not have one with your Creator. You cannot say that you love one whom you've never seen and hate the one you see every day. So that relationship with the one you see with your eyes will lead you to a relationship to the one that you see with your eye. And all of this is a fulfillment of the promise of a consciousness and awareness that will bring you to the place of knowing who you are, how you were created, why you were created. And the results of that is to bring this earth realm to a state of being where as above, so is below. Meaning that the same principles that govern the world beyond us, or the world above, the superior world, are the principles that govern this world. And when those principles govern this world, it is then that heaven and earth becomes one, that enlightenment and this material world become one. And that ends the greed, that ends the animalistic attitude of survival and procreation, and brings us to the attitude of a human, which means that we are our brother's keeper in every sense of the word. Is that understood, or is that clear, or there questions, or there comments? Am I making sense? And I need you to say something.
Yes.
Thank you.
Made sense to me?
Thank you. Anyone else?
Well, Rev, on that promise, to me it kind of swings both ways. If the promise is, hey, we go up 85 and you just stay on Interstate 85 till you get to Greensboro, you will get a wedding. If you elect not to go up 85, there's a promise in that too. So could you talk about the other side of that promise, the not so good side of it? I mean, you kind of alluded to it, but I mean, like,
if you go up 85, you get to Greensboro, you got the promise. However, if you go up 85 and then you veer off to 77, you just take it a long way around. You're going to have some pitfalls. You're going to have struggles. You're going to have doubt. You're going to feel disengaged. You're going to have periods of loneliness. You're going to feel like giving up because you've taken the long way around. But you will eventually get there. And the route that you may have to take is to get off 77, come back 40, and come back across the 85. But you will get there. You have a choice. You can get there by submitting and having a deep desire to be there and following what's being revealed to you, even though it does not look like it makes sense to you. You know it's real because it resonates. Or you can say it doesn't take all of this, and you can go the other route, but in doing so, you are going to be faced with voter suppression. You're going to be faced with police murders. You're going to be forced with working on the same job and getting paid less than the one who works next to you because of the color of your skin. You're going to be faced with living in substandard conditions. You're going to be faced with struggle in finding employment. All of these things are remnants of trying to do things your own way, which is another way of saying trying to get to Greensboro another route, going through religious antics and religious rituals, trying to get to a place that is devoid of those rituals and antics. Does that make sense, George? Don't blow your horn. I don't speak Hornish. Does that make sense?
Roger.
Thank you. Anyone else? Any questions?
Yes, Angela, I got another question. In Ecclesiastes, when it talks about, it says this race is not given to the swift or the strong, but the ones who endure to the one who endures to the end. Is it when you look at race? I mean, I noticed as we on a relay, but when I think of race, I do think of relay, and then I look at journey. So, is the word race? Basically, what does that mean?
It's simply talking about a simple metaphor. If you're going to travel the journey, you don't have to worry about how quickly you're going to get there. But you do have to be concerned about whether or not you're willing to endure what it takes to get there. And if you want to see the metaphor of a relay race, then you may start out as the first leg and hand the baton to the second leg. And that second leg gets behind by 15 yards. But it doesn't mean that you've lost the race, because the third leg picks up 10. And the last leg of that race picks up the other 5 and now passes and crosses the finish line, or crosses at the same time. So all it's saying is this. You're not going to pick it up all at one time. Just take your time and endure it. You see that the voter registration bill, the voter suppression bill, they are passing around the country, and it doesn't look like the government's going to do anything. Hold your peace. You see that there are white supremacists, and there are people who look like you who support them. Don't think that all is lost. Hold your peace. Endure the hardships that you must face in this journey, and you will see endurance is what wins the race, is not swiftness. Because if you try to get through it on your own time, you not only are going to make mistakes, you're going to be exhausted and beaten down, and your experiences of that which is spiritual will become more of a burden to you than a source of strength and life. I hope that answers your question.
Yes, it did. Thank you.
You're welcome. Anyone else?
Another thing that it also alludes to in the saying, in addition to that, is that it doesn't take any special trait that someone else possesses or you think you're viewing someone else having, and therefore it excludes you from being able to endure to the end. And it's giving you, I don't want to say hope, but it's giving you that inspiration to go along, and says that anyone can do this no matter the circumstance.
Thank you, sir. Did I help you, Andrew?
Yes, that made sense.
Okay.
Does it also say that everyone will get there? It's just depends on the path they take? Because I know everybody has to find their own path. Some people will veer here and there and yonder. But eventually everyone will get there, yes?
Yes, ma'am.
Yep, and don't be distracted by the way that other people get there and say, oh, what someone else is doing. Everyone is in their own, personal race. It's not a competition. If it is a competition, it's only with yourself.
Right. Anyone else?
Yeah, Pastor, this is George. I just want to say, I think the scripture that you gave us in terms of John, first chapter, verse 1 through 4, is speaking about the importance of our beginning And I think that we need to look at that nature was our first teacher. And when we can begin to look at the beginning in terms of looking at it in different concepts, but you mentioned earlier in reference to the Cushites and the Kemetic, teachings or philosophies or concepts. And I think that in the beginning was the Word. And I think it's that Word that we begin to come to understand from that beginning is important. And so for me, I think that it all started, with, I am the creator, having a human experience, but that energy that was there before existence began, I think it's something, again, that at some point in time, I just like to revisit in terms of what this first verse means when we talk about the Word. And so at some point in time, I think I would like to revisit, this verse and see if we can get some clarity with regards to it.
Yes, sir. Just whenever when you're ready, bring the questions or introduce it, and we'll go from there. There's no problem with that at all. As a matter of fact, I welcome it because in discussing this first verse in John, it would be very difficult to explore it without exploring the first verse or in the first chapter of Genesis as well.
Okay, thank you.
Thank you. Anyone else?
This is Angela again. I meant to ask too, what is the under the sun part?
Meaning in this earth realm. There's nothing in this earth realm at all. Everything that you see has been done before. We have a tendency to think that we are different than people were in antiquity. We are not. Simply because we have a car and not a mule and wagon or not walking everywhere we go, or we have nuclear-powered submarines as opposed to canoes, it doesn't mean that anything has changed. Change in the spiritual sense has nothing to do with your physical environment as much as it has to do with your spiritual principles, the principles that guide our lives, the principles that determine how we interact with each other. And the principles that determine how we interact with each other also influence how we interact with our environment. And what we have seen is that our negligence in making efforts to righteously interact with each other has also resulted in our negligence in our relationship with our environment. And as a result of that, not only is there a darkness that covers the attitudes and the attitudes of men, but there is also a darkness that covers the earth, our natural environment. And because of that darkness that covers our natural environment, there are such deep divisions amongst men based upon economics and colors and skin color until it doesn't seem as though we will ever be able to repair them. And that same darkness is so deep in our environment until it appears as though our earth is going to become inhabitable for humans or for anything for that matter. However, even though it appears to be that way, our responsibility is to lift the shroud of darkness and reveal the light of order. And in doing so, we then bring balance to our thoughts and our interactions. And when we bring balance to our thoughts and our interactions with each other and look beyond the outer appearance and embrace the reality that all of us are one, it is at that moment that the darkness that is so deep in our earth that appears to be destroying it becomes a source of healing for the earth itself. And as a result of that, not only does righteousness prevail in the midst of men, righteousness brings back into balance the very natural environment itself. I'm done. I hope that helps.
Yes.
Anyone else? Questions or comments? Oh, go ahead. Did I hear someone about to speak? Okay. Let me say this. Next weekend, the 25th, 26th, 27th, we will not meet. However, that first weekend in October, we will. Again, the 24th, the 25th, the 25th, the 26th and 27th, we will not meet. However, we will meet on the 2nd, 3rd, and 4th of October. And if you are speaking with anyone who are normally on these lines, on this line, will you please remind them or inform them of this? And if there are any questions, my making that announcement does not mean that you cannot ask any more questions. It's simply I wanted to put that out there before we got to the end. Are there any questions?
Hey, Real.
Yes.
Have we ever finished that sermon about prayer and the way you pray and how you pray?
No, we did not. But we don't ever finish anything because what we are talking about is life and spirituality, and there are no ends. Anything that we talk about. What happens is someone will have have a question on their mind, and they raise that question, and we end up where we are now. Or someone will be shown something in the scriptures, and we end up discussing it. It doesn't mean that we have abandoned anything, neither does it mean that we've come to an end of anything. It's
okay.
that we've been shown something else. That's all. Okay?
Okay. Because there's something I want to ask about that, but we'll do it next time.
Okay. Make sure you write it, Charles, okay?
All right, I will.
Okay. All right. Anyone else?
Pastor, I have one, and this is Rania, and it may be something for next time too. But at one point, we were talking about how everyone will get there, even though they're past, meanders. Everyone eventually gets there. And I remember when Nick, I think it was, we talked through this vision of what heaven and hell were like, and how I can't remember what we were reading. That at each level, you dealt more clearly with whatever what you were trying to work through. I don't know if anyone remembers that. It's like anyway, that you people who were trapped in fanaticism became even more so in the next life, and even more so until they were delivered from that. Does that ring a bell?
It does.
Well, so my question when I heard that comment was, is this reincarnation, so to speak, about separating something out from ourselves? Because at one point in that thought exercise or that story, the part of us that could not reincarnate with the universe disappeared. I remember it just kind of fading. And the other rejoining.
I think that where we are now, we have a deeper, more clearer understanding of what we were then, and especially in terms of reincarnation. The energy of fanaticism remains in the earth until it is properly repurposed. What do I mean? The same fanaticism that was in the earth with the evangelical sect of religion is in the earth today. The vernacular may be different, but the desires are the same. And the reason they are where they are is because there has not been a type of item in the earth to repurpose that energy. However, that deep desire is in the earth now, and the repurposing of that energy is in process. When that energy is repurposed, not only do we see a difference in the approaches of religion, but we also see a difference in the way men govern each other. So the idea of reincarnation is the passing of that energy from one generation to another. It's not, Rainier being reincarnated as Gloria, and Gloria being exactly like Rainier was. No, it's the energy of that previous person, and that is the reason they were asking, they were saying to Jesus that he is Elijah or Isaiah or Jeremiah, because the energy, the principles that Jesus was teaching are the same principles that those prophets were teaching as well. Does that make sense, Rainier?
Yes. So my question about the integration or separation, I guess what I'm hearing is it's about bringing that energy into balance and integrating it into the whole, as opposed to separating it and letting it die, casting it out.
Yes, right. And mind you, it's not an assimilation of it, it's the integration of it.
Gotcha. Okay.
So
that's all I had.
All right. Anyone else?
Yes, this is Andy. I wanted to say something. It kind of makes me. I didn't want to. Well, yesterday when I was at work and when I asked that question about Jesus, I was over there in space and I was talking to the Creator, and out of the blue, I don't know where it came from. It was dealing with Mitch McConnell, and something like shell the eye or something like that. But when I heard it, it made me feel some type of way, because I said, no, I'm not speaking this over this man's life. I know it made me actually feel bad, because this thought, and I said, well, this thought is not an outside. This thought came because I wasn't even thinking about that. It's just like and I said, this thought came from within me. I didn't separate and say this is a different was outside of me. This is what I heard. So then I was like, I don't have the right to speak over this man's life. And then I thought, well, maybe it's talking about the attitude. Is attitudes we talked about the Mitch McConnell's attitudes, and how that attitude transcends to other people and sort of that way. But yeah, just that thought of hearing it made me feel funny. That's all I wanted to say.
Okay. Ms. McConnell is no different than John C. Calhoun. And I do personally believe that John C. Calhoun was one to ever walk the face of this earth. So Mitch McConnell's attitude is a part of the same energy that John C. Calhoun had. And if you really think about that type of energy, where is it centered? That energy is centered in in the same places where it has always been, in what we call the Deep South, southern states. Why is it still living? If there were people so dedicated to ridding the society of that type of energy and those types of principles, why are they still available? The reason is because those who professed to be at odds with those principles, their attitudes, were making a profit off of those attitudes. And they simply massaged and manipulated those attitudes for their benefit. And as a result of it, they remain, not only did they remain in the earth, but they became more pervasive. And you say, well, we had the Reconstruction, Civil Rights Movement, etc., and those attitudes are still here. Well, you cannot use the same principles that stirs the pot and expect to get something different. What I'm saying is this. Those who massaged and manipulated those attitudes for their benefit are the same people in the same places that these attitudes were. What happened is these attitudes were allowed to remain in the earth and to actually rule this country because it was not adversarial to those who were in power. It was simply adversarial to those who did not look like them. And for the most part, no one really cared. Well, here we are now with those same attitudes. And what happens now is there are people whose eye has been opened, and they are beginning to see that this should not be the way it never should have been, and that energy is being repurposed now. When you hear someone say, I was a part of the Proud Boys, or I was in this white supremacist group, and I saw the error of my ways, and I walked away from it, and now I'm trying to help others to see. What you are hearing is someone professing, you're hearing someone say that the energy that guided them has been repurposed for the benefit of those who that energy was an adversary to. Does that make sense to you guys? Does that make sense to you?
Yes. Yes.
Okay, thank you. Anyone else? Okay. Tomorrow, as I had hoped today, and we didn't do it, and we may not tomorrow. It doesn't matter. However, I want to share something with you guys in regards to duality that I was shown last evening. So we'll look at this tomorrow, and it is my desire that you have the most enjoyable rest of this day that you've ever had in your life, because this is indeed the beginning of the rest of your life. So have a great day.
Thank
Goodbye.
you.
Thank you, everybody.
Thank you.
Thank you, everybody.
Bye-bye, everybody.
Bye,
My
everybody.
family.
Bye.